The day the Vraxians arrived changed everything. Their ships appeared suddenly in the skies above major cities worldwide, large silver discs that hovered silently, reflecting the sunlight. People stopped and stared. Traffic halted. The world held its breath. No one knew what to expect. Movies had prepared humanity for the worst: destruction, invasion, the end of everything. But the Vraxians came in peace. Or so they claimed. Jack Nelson watched the news from his small cabin in Montana. The marine biologist had moved away from the coast 3 years ago, seeking quiet after 2 decades studying ocean ecosystems. At 45, with gray starting to appear in his beard, Jack had wanted simplicity. Now, watching aliens step out from their ships to meet world leaders, he wondered if simplicity would ever be possible again. First contact, the news anchor said, her voice trembling slightly. The visitors called themselves Vraxians. They claimed to represent something called a Galactic Conclave. Jack opened another beer. The Vraxians looked almost human, if humans had pale blue skin, stood 7 feet tall, and had 4-finger hands. They wore what appeared to be metallic jumpsuits that shifted colors depending on the light. The alien leader spoke perfect English. "We come with knowledge and friendship," it said. "We have watched your world for some time. Your species shows great potential." In the days that followed, governments around the world formed the United Earth Coalition. Ambassador William Carter, a veteran diplomat with kind eyes and a steady voice, was chosen to represent humanity. Jack watched with the rest of the world as Carter shook hands with the Vraxian leader, whose name sounded like a series of clicks and whistles, but who allowed humans to call him Prime. "This begins a new chapter for Earth," Carter said during the ceremony. "Together, we will learn and grow." The Vraxians shared some of their technology, medical advances that cured previously untreatable diseases, agricultural methods that increased crop yields, and clean energy systems that reduce pollution. They established embassies in every major city and invited human scientists to collaborate with them. Dr. Lisa Morgan became famous as the lead human scientist working with the Vraxians. Her team focused on medical applications of alien technology. "What they've shown us will save millions of lives," she said in an interview 6 months after first contact. "We've made more progress in half a year than we would have in decades on our own." Jack followed the news with interest, but maintained his distance. Something about the Vraxians bothered him, though he couldn't explain what. Perhaps it was how they always seemed to be observing, collecting data, asking questions but revealing little about themselves. His neighbor, Olivia Wright, shared his concerns. The retired Army sergeant lived half a mile down the road with her teenage son. She stopped by Jack's cabin one evening, bringing homemade bread and worry lines around her eyes. "They're mapping everything," she said as they sat on his porch. "Military bases, power plants, water supplies. Carter's giving them whatever they ask for." Jack shrugged. "They're curious. Wouldn't we do the same if we visited their planet?" Olivia's eyes narrowed. "There's curious, and then there's strategic. I've seen those kinds of assessments before, Jack, in war zones." 3 years passed. The Vraxian presence became normal, their technology integrated into daily life. Children played with toys modeled after Vraxian ships. Universities offered courses in Vraxian language and culture. The global economy boomed with new industries based on shared alien knowledge. Jack maintained his simple life, fishing in a nearby lake and occasionally consulting on marine protection projects. He kept his old radio on the kitchen counter, sometimes listening to news, but more often to classical music. The Vraxians had never ventured into rural Montana, preferring the cities and their dense populations. He was frying fish for dinner when the radio broadcast was interrupted. The emergency tone blared through his small cabin. Then a frantic voice. "This is not a drill. We are under attack. Repeat, we are under attack." The Vraxians have launched simultaneous strikes against major cities worldwide. New York is gone. London is gone. Beijing. The broadcast cut off. Jack stood frozen, spatula in hand. He tried other stations. All emergency broadcasts. All reporting the same thing. The Vraxians had turned on humanity without warning. He stepped outside. The evening sky was clear, stars beginning to appear. In the distance, toward the nearest city of Bozeman, a faint orange glow lit the horizon. Jack's hand shook as he went back inside and tried to call someone, anyone. The phones were dead. An hour later, he heard a vehicle approaching. He grabbed his hunting rifle and waited by the window. The headlights belonged to Olivia's old truck. She pulled up with a screech of brakes, her teenage son Ben in the passenger seat. Jack rushed outside to meet them. "It's happening everywhere," Olivia said, her face ashen. She wore her old army jacket and had a pistol holstered at her hip. They hit every major city at once. No warning. But why? Jack asked. Everything was going well. Olivia's laugh was bitter. Was it? Or were they just studying us, learning our weaknesses? They're not just killing us, Jack. They're erasing us. Ben, 16 and gangly, looked terrified. Mom got us out as soon as the news broke. The highways are jammed with people trying to leave the cities. They went inside. Jack turned the radio back on, finding a station still broadcasting. A military official was speaking, advised to seek shelter away from population centers. The Vraxian ships are targeting government buildings, military installations, and infrastructure. We've received reports of ground forces in some areas. All available military personnel are to report. Static replaced the voice. Jack switched to another frequency, then another. Nothing but static. Their ships are in orbit, Olivia explained, taking out satellites, communications networks. Classic first strike, to disable command and control. How do you know all this? Jack asked. I've kept in touch with old military friends, she said. There were those of us who never trusted the Vraxians. We've been preparing, but not enough. Not for the scale of attack. The next few days passed in a blur of sporadic news reports and rumors. The death toll was in the billions. The Vraxians had established orbital platforms that could target anything on Earth's surface. Major cities were in ruins. Governments had collapsed or gone into hiding. Military forces were scattered and disorganized. Jack, Olivia, and Ben were joined by other survivors from nearby areas. A doctor and his wife from Bozeman. A school teacher who had been camping when the attacks began. 2 college students who had been hiking in the mountains. They gathered in Jack's cabin, sharing what little information they had. The Vraxians had made an announcement, broadcast worldwide on all frequencies. Humans are too unpredictable, too dangerous to join the Galactic Conclave. Your resources will serve a more worthy species. It was never about friendship, the doctor said bitterly. They wanted our planet. And they studied us for 3 years to learn exactly how to take it. Olivia added. A week after the initial attack, they spotted the first Vraxian scout ship. It flew low over the forest, scanning the area. Everyone hid in Jack's root cellar, barely breathing until it passed. They're looking for survivors, Olivia whispered. We need to be more careful. No fires during the day. No lights at night. Jack realized a simple life was gone forever. What do we do now? He asked. Olivia's face was grim in the dim light of the cellar. We survive. We adapt. And eventually we fight back. With what? The school teacher asked. They have spaceships. We don't even have working phones. We have something they don't. Olivia said firmly. We know this planet. It's our home. And we're very good at surviving against the odds. That night, as the others slept in various corners of his cabin, Jack stood on the porch looking at the stars. Somewhere up there, Vraxian ships were plotting the complete destruction of his species. They had committed genocide on a scale never before seen in human history. And humanity's response? It would not be to fight technology with technology. They couldn't win that way. Instead, as Jack was beginning to understand, their response would be to abandon what the Vraxians recognized as civilization, to become something new, something invisible to their enemies' understanding. He looked back at his cabin, at the people sleeping inside, former strangers now bound together by survival, the first seeds of something different, something that might, against all odds, endure. Jack took a deep breath of the cool night air. The world had ended, and yet somehow it continued. 6 months passed since the Vraxians revealed their true intentions. Winter had come and gone in the mountains of Montana. Jack Nelson's small cabin now served as a meeting place for 23 survivors. They had built additional shelters nearby, hidden under the thick forest canopy, to avoid detection from above. Olivia Wright had naturally become their leader. Her military experience proved invaluable as they learned to live without technology. No phones, no electricity, no engines. Anything that produced an energy signature could attract Vraxian scouts. They're looking for what they recognize as civilization. Olivia explained one evening as the group gathered around a small, smokeless fire in a pit dug deep into the ground. Electronic signals, heat patterns from cities, organized movement. If we don't look civilized to them, they might overlook us. Jack had become her right-hand man, his knowledge of living off the land complementing her tactical thinking. Ben, Olivia's son, had grown inches in the months since the attack and had lost the last traces of childhood from his face. He was now in charge of their hunting parties, having shown remarkable skill with a bow. Any news from other groups? Jack asked Olivia quietly as the others ate their meal of rabbit stew. She nodded slightly. Nancy returned from her scouting trip. There's a community in Idaho using the old mining tunnels. About 40 people. And the message from the East finally arrived. The message from the East was their term for communication that traveled through a human chain stretching across the country. People pass information from one small group to another, sometimes taking weeks to travel long distances. It was slow but impossible for Vraxians to detect. Later that night, Olivia showed Jack a small piece of paper with neat handwriting. It's from someone named Greg Harris in the Appalachian Mountains. They've developed a way to communicate using sound through rock. Vibrations that can travel for miles through the mountain but don't register on Vraxian sensors. Jack studied the paper. Could we adapt that here? Maybe, but there's more. Olivia pointed to the second paragraph. There's a scientist working in an old bunker, Dr. Karen Ellis. She's studying captured Vraxian technology and has made discoveries about how they operate. The most valuable information was that Vraxians relied heavily on network systems. Their individual units, whether ships, soldiers, or equipment, needed constant updates from their central command. Without these updates, they became less effective, sometimes even confused. This could be useful, Jack said, his mind racing with possibilities. There's one more thing. Olivia's voice dropped even lower. There's a submarine, American Navy. It went deep when the attack started and has stayed hidden. Captain Henry Martinez commands it. They're using the deep ocean trenches where Vraxian ships can't follow due to pressure limitations. Jack's eyebrows rose. As a former marine biologist, he understood the protection the deep ocean could provide. Smart. They've established some kind of underwater base. Olivia continued. And there's mention of someone named Patricia Donovan, an astronaut who managed to hide on an abandoned space station. She's gathering intelligence on Vraxian movements. This news sparked something in Jack. Hope, perhaps. For months, their focus had been merely surviving. Now, learning of others who were not just surviving but finding ways to resist, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The next morning, Jack walked through the forest with Ben, checking their traps. The teenager had grown silent in recent months, but today he seemed ready to talk. Do you think we'll ever beat them? Ben asked suddenly as they knelt beside a stream. Jack considered his answer carefully. Not in the way we would have tried before. We can't outfight them with tanks and planes. But humans are adaptable. We might find a different way. By becoming uncivilized? Ben sounded doubtful. Not uncivilized, Jack corrected. Differently civilized. Think about it. Throughout history, when a technologically superior force invaded, those who survived often did so by changing how they lived, by becoming invisible to the invaders, or by operating in ways the invaders couldn't understand. Ben nodded slowly, like how Native Americans adapted to fight colonial armies. Exactly. Or resistance movements during occupations. We're doing something similar, but on a global scale. When they returned to camp, they found a newcomer, a thin woman with short gray hair and sharp eyes. She introduced herself as Diane Fleming, a former park ranger who had been moving from group to group. sharing information. The Vraxians have established harvesting centers, she told them as they sat in Jack's cabin. They're stripping areas of resources, metals, minerals, water, but they're doing it systematically, starting with former urban centers and working outward. How do you know this? Olivia asked. I've observed 3 different centers. They follow patterns, very rigid patterns. Diane pulled out a hand-drawn map. They move in straight lines from their landing zones. They don't deviate, even when going around would be more efficient. And they have blind spots, areas their sensors don't cover well. This information led to heated discussion. If the Vraxians were so predictable, perhaps their movements could be anticipated. Areas they were likely to ignore could become safe zones for humans to gather and organize. Over the next few weeks, Jack and Olivia worked with Diane to create maps predicting Vraxian movement patterns. They sent this information east and west through their human messenger network. In return, they received more news from other survivor groups. The submarine network had expanded. Captain Martinez had found natural caverns along the abyssal trenches where the pressure kept Vraxians away. These underwater havens house hundreds of survivors now, using geothermal vents or energy that was undetectable from the surface. Dr. Ellis's research had progressed too. She had discovered that Vraxian communication systems were vulnerable to certain types of interference that mimic natural phenomena. Her team was developing devices that could create such interference without using electronic components that would give away their position. One evening, as spring turned to summer, Jack sat with Olivia on a ridge overlooking the valley. In the far distance, they could see the faint lights of a Vraxian harvesting center that had been established in what was once Bozeman. They think they're winning, Olivia said softly. And by any traditional measure of war, they are, but this isn't a traditional war anymore. Jack nodded. We're becoming something they don't recognize as a threat. Something outside their understanding of civilization. Exactly. Dr. Ellis's latest message says they classify threats based on technological signatures, energy outputs, communication patterns, resource usage. We're dropping below their threshold of concern. It was true. The scattered human communities had adapted in ways that made them nearly invisible to Vraxian monitoring. They used no electronics. They moved in small groups that resembled animal migrations. They built shelters that blended with natural formations. They communicated through methods of Vraxians considered too primitive to monitor, drums that mimic natural sounds, smoke signals that look like normal forest mist, messengers who travel on foot along animal trails. We're not giving up, Jack said, understanding something profound. We're evolving. Back at camp, Ben had returned from a long hunting trip with news. He had encountered another group of survivors who had developed a method of using river currents to transmit messages by releasing specially carved wooden chips into the water. These chips could be read by those who knew what to look for, but appeared as natural debris to Vraxian scanners. They're connected to a network that stretches all the way to the Mississippi River, Ben explained excitedly. They say there are thousands of people living along the waterways, completely undetected. This pattern repeated across what remained of human civilization. Instead of trying to rebuild what was lost, survivors were creating something new, not a retreat to primitive living, but an advance into a different kind of existence, one that operated within the blind spots of Vraxian perception. 3 years after the initial attack, humanity had not defeated the Vraxians, but neither had they been eliminated. They had changed, adapted, evolved. The Vraxians controlled the cities, the resources, the skies. But humans controlled the spaces in between, the shadows, the depths. Diane returned to their camp after a long journey south with incredible news. The underwater colonies have started manufacturing, she told them, using materials from the ocean floor and geothermal energy. They're building devices based on Dr. Ellis's research, mechanical disruptors that can interfere with Vraxian systems without using electronics. And Patricia Donovan? Olivia asked. Any word from orbit? Better than word, Diane smiled. She's established a lunar colony in the shadows of crater rims. The Vraxians don't patrol there regularly. They're mining ice for water and building reflectors that can be used to send coded light signals visible only from certain locations on Earth. That night, As the community gathered for their evening meal, Jack looked around at the faces illuminated by the small fire. Former doctors and teachers and students who had learned to live without the technology that had once defined their civilization. They wore handmade clothes. They ate food they had hunted or grown. They treated illnesses with medicinal plants. Yet they were not primitive. They were discussing complex strategies, sharing sophisticated knowledge, developing new methods of survival and resistance. They had not abandoned civilization. They had reinvented it. "We're not just surviving," Jack said to Olivia as they watched the stars come out. "We're creating something the Vraxians can't even see." Olivia nodded, her face determined in the starlight. "And someday, when they finally notice us, it'll be too late for them to stop what we become." 3 years had passed since the Vraxians attacked Earth. The small community in Montana had grown to nearly 50 people. They had spread out across the mountainside, building small shelters that blended with the landscape. From the air, they looked like nothing more than natural features of the forest. Jack Nelson sat by a small stream, teaching 3 children how to catch fish with their bare hands. The oldest was 10, born before the invasion. The youngest was just 2, born in the New World. None of them had ever seen a Vraxian up close. To them, the aliens were monsters from stories told around evening fires. "Patience," Jack whispered as a trout swam nearby. "Move slowly. Be part of the stream." The children watched with wide eyes as Jack's hands moved through the water, gentle as leaves floating on the surface. With a sudden motion, he scooped the fish onto the bank. "You make it look easy," said Lily, the oldest child. Jack smiled. "It took me months to learn. Nature has rhythms. The Vraxians don't understand them, which is why they can't find us easily." Later that day, a messenger arrived at their camp. He was thin and weathered, with legs muscled from months of traveling on foot across the country. His name was Peter, and he carried news from the east. The community gathered to hear him speak. Olivia, now with streaks of gray in her dark hair, stood beside Jack as Peter unfolded a piece of cloth with writing made from natural dyes. "Keith Brooks sends this message," Peter said. Keith was a former history professor who had become a coordinator between survivor communities. "The silent strategy is working. Vraxian patrols have decreased by 60% in areas where we've removed all technological signatures." This was good news. The silent strategy was a name they had given to their approach, abandoning all electronic communications and energy signatures that would register on Vraxian sensors. Instead, they used methods that were undetectable: messenger birds, water drums, smoke signals modified to appear as natural phenomena. "There's more," Peter continued. "Dr. Ellis has confirmed her theory. Vraxian units need constant updates from their network. When cut off for extended periods, they become disoriented. Some have even been observed trying to communicate with natural features, mistaking them for other Vraxians." Jack exchanged a glance with Olivia. This confirmed what they had suspected. The aliens were so dependent on their technology that they couldn't function well without it. Peter had news from other communities, too. In the ruins of Chicago, a woman named Samantha West led a group that had mastered moving through Vraxian-controlled territories by mimicking the behavioral patterns of urban wildlife. They discovered that Vraxian sensors were calibrated to detect human technology and organized movement patterns, not humans themselves. "And Captain Martinez?" Olivia asked. The submarine commander had become something of a legend among survivors. "The underwater network has expanded," Peter said. "They've established colonies in the Mariana Trench and other deep ocean areas. They're using materials from the ocean floor to build devices based on Dr. Ellis's designs." The most exciting news came from space. Patricia Donovan's community on the abandoned lunar base had grown. They had discovered that the Vraxians' long-range communications relied on quantum entanglement technology that was vulnerable to specific gravitational disturbances. "They're developing a method to create those disturbances," Peter explained. "If it works, they could disrupt Vraxian communications across their entire fleet." After the meeting, Jack and Olivia walked through the forest to check on their newest hiding spots. Ben, now 19 and fully a man, joined them. He had become their best scout, able to move through Vraxian-controlled areas without detection. "I've been thinking," Ben said as they walked. The Vraxians don't understand our new methods because they're so different from what they expected. What if we push that further? What if we developed approaches that are completely outside their understanding of warfare? Olivia looked at her son with pride. What do you have in mind? Ben had been studying animal behavior, particularly how certain species use camouflage and mimicry to survive. The Vraxians rely on patterns. Their sensors look for specific signatures. What if we created false signatures to confuse them, make them see threats where there are none, and miss the real ones right in front of them? It was an intriguing idea. They brought it up at the next community meeting. A former computer programmer named Alan suggested they could create simple mechanical devices that mimicked electronic signatures but served no actual purpose. These could be placed in remote areas, drawing Vraxian attention away from human settlements. Over the next months, they put this plan into action, using knowledge shared through the messenger network. Communities across North America began creating ghost signals, simple mechanical devices that created heat or sound patterns similar to human technology. These were placed far from actual settlements, creating a network of false positives that stretched Vraxian resources thin. The strategy worked better than they had hoped. Vraxian patrols increased in uninhabited areas, chasing phantom signals while real human communities remained undetected. One evening, as summer turned to fall, Jack sat with Olivia on their favorite ridge overlooking the valley. The distant Vraxian harvesting center that had once been Bozeman was less active now, with fewer ships coming and going. They're pulling back, Olivia observed, reducing their presence on the surface. They think they've won, Jack said, that they've eliminated all significant human resistance. Olivia nodded. That's exactly what we want them to think. The latest messages from their global network confirmed this pattern. Vraxian forces were concentrating on resource extraction rather than hunting humans. They had established large processing centers in former urban areas, but were leaving vast regions of the planet unpatrolled. This created opportunities. Communities that had been isolated could now connect more easily. Knowledge and resources could be shared across wider areas. The human network was growing stronger, even as the Vraxian presence appeared to be winding down. Dr. Ellis's research had produced a breakthrough. Her team had developed a method of disrupting Vraxian communications by introducing specific frequency patterns that appeared as natural stellar radiation. The disruptions were minor but cumulative, causing increasing coordination problems among Vraxian forces. Captain Martinez's underwater colonies had become manufacturing centers, producing these disruption devices using geothermal energy and materials harvested from the ocean floor. Completely off the Vraxian grid, Patricia Donovan's lunar team had expanded their operations into the shadows of crater rims, unseen by Vraxian patrols. They used the moon's natural resources to build simple but effective tools for monitoring Vraxian movements and disrupting their communications. 5 years after the initial genocide, humanity had developed a counter-strategy unlike anything in their military history. They were not trying to match Vraxian technology. They were circumventing it entirely, developing an entirely new civilization model that existed in the blind spots of their enemies. Jack had been invited to visit one of the underwater colonies. The journey would be dangerous, requiring him to travel through areas the Vraxians still patrolled. But the knowledge he could bring back about marine resources would be valuable to his community. Before leaving, he walked with Ben through their territory. The young man had become a respected leader in his own right, developing new methods of moving undetected through Vraxian-controlled areas. "I'll be gone for several months," Jack said. "You'll need to help your mother." Ben nodded. "We'll be fine. The community is strong now." They stopped at a viewpoint overlooking their settlement. From here, it was nearly impossible to spot the human presence. Shelters were built into hillsides or disguised as natural formations. Gardens were designed to resemble wild growth patterns. Even the paths between dwellings followed animal trails or natural contours of the land. "Look at what we've built," Jack said softly. "Not with technology, but with adaptation. Do you ever miss the old world?" Ben asked. Jack considered the question. "I miss certain conveniences. Hot showers, coffee shops. But in some ways, we're more connected now than we were before. Everyone here depends on each other. We built something meaningful. That night, the community gathered for a feast to bid Jack farewell. They ate foods they had hunted, gathered, or grown themselves. They drank beer brewed from local grains. They sang songs softly, keeping the sound contained so it wouldn't travel beyond their small valley. Olivia stood to address the group. 5 years ago, the Vraxians tried to destroy us. They thought that by attacking our cities, our technology, our governments, they were attacking civilization itself. She looked around at the faces illuminated by the small fire, but they were wrong. Civilization isn't buildings or machines. It's people working together. It's knowledge passed down. It's adapting to challenges. Jack watched the faces around him. People who had lost everything but had built something new. Children who had never known the old world, but were growing up healthy and strong in this one. Elders whose knowledge of pre-industrial skills had suddenly become vital again. The Vraxians had committed genocide against what humanity had been, but they couldn't imagine what humanity would become. As Jack prepared for his journey the next morning, he felt a strange sense of optimism. Humanity wasn't fighting the Vraxians directly. They were transforming into something the aliens couldn't comprehend as a threat. Not primitive, but different. A civilization defined not by its technology, but by its ability to adapt, to evolve, to become invisible to those who would destroy it. And soon, very soon, that invisible civilization would be ready to reclaim their world. Jack returned from the underwater colony after 3 months of difficult travel. The journey had changed him. He had seen things he never thought possible. Human settlements built into the walls of deep ocean trenches, illuminated by bioluminescent organisms cultivated specifically for that purpose. People who had adapted to live in near darkness, who communicated through a complex language of light flashes and water vibrations. Captain Martinez had grown older, his hair now completely white, but his eyes remained sharp and determined. He had shown Jack the manufacturing centers where they built devices designed by Dr. Ellis, mechanical disruptors that could interfere with Vraxian systems without using any electronics themselves. The pressure down here keeps the Vraxians away, Martinez had explained. Their hull materials can't withstand the depths. We've created a world they can't touch. Now, returning to the Montana community, Jack carried both knowledge and new tools. The underwater colonies had sent gifts, specially designed mechanical devices that could distort Vraxian sensor readings, water filtration systems that work without power, and methods for growing nutritious algae in limited space. Olivia welcomed him with a tight hug. "You look different," she said, studying his face. Jack nodded. "I've seen our future. We're not just surviving anymore. We're building something new." The Montana community had grown in his absence. New shelters had been constructed, blending perfectly with the landscape. The garden systems had expanded, with plants arranged in patterns that mimicked natural growth. From the air, even from close range, it would appear as nothing more than undisturbed wilderness. Ben had established a training program for young scouts. He taught them how to move like animals, how to blend with their surroundings, how to observe Vraxian patrols without being detected. Some of the students had traveled as far as the West Coast, bringing back news and establishing new connections with other communities. 5 years after the initial attack, Earth appeared defeated to Vraxian sensors. Human technological signatures had virtually disappeared. The aliens had begun scaling back their occupation forces, believing they had successfully eliminated all but a few negligible pockets of survivors. This was exactly what humanity had planned. A week after Jack's return, a messenger arrived from the east with exciting news. Ryan Phillips, a former civil engineer, had led efforts to repurpose abandoned subway systems and sewer networks beneath what had once been New York City. His underground community now housed over 1,000 people, powered by mechanical energy and bioluminescence. They live right under a Vraxian processing center, the messenger said, her eyes wide with excitement. The aliens walk above them every day and have no idea humans are there. The messenger brought more news. Across rural areas, communities had adopted nomadic lifestyles, moving in patterns indistinguishable from animal migrations. Susan Miller, once an agricultural scientist, had developed farming methods that resembled natural growth patterns, invisible to Vraxian agricultural monitoring. Most exciting was the news from orbit. Patricia Donovan's lunar colony had expanded into the crater shadows, unseen by Vraxian patrols. They harvested ice for water and developed solar collectors made from lunar regolith that absorbed rather than reflected energy, making them virtually invisible. They've been studying Vraxian communication systems, the messenger said. They discovered that the aliens use quantum entanglement for their long-range communications. It's incredibly efficient, but vulnerable to certain types of interference that can be generated using the moon's natural magnetic field. Jack, Olivia, and the community leaders discussed this new information long into the night. The picture emerging from reports around the world was clear. Humanity hadn't been fighting the occupation. They had been systematically preparing to dismantle it from within, using methods so far outside Vraxian, understanding that the aliens never recognized the threat. The next morning, Jack walked with Ben to their observation point overlooking the valley. In the distance, they could see a Vraxian harvesting ship moving slowly over the forest. It followed a precise, predictable path, the same one it followed every week for months. They're creatures of pattern, Ben observed. They do the same things the same way, over and over. That's their weakness, Jack agreed. They can't imagine approaches that don't fit their understanding of how intelligent species should behave. Ben pointed to a distant ridge. Our latest ghost signal device is there. It creates heat patterns that mimic a small human settlement. The Vraxians have sent 3 patrols to investigate, but they never find anything because we remove it before they arrive and place it somewhere else. Jack smiled. We're not just hiding from them. We're training them to ignore anomalies. Over the next few months, the strategy expanded. Communities across North America coordinated to create patterns of false signals that appeared and disappeared in seemingly random locations. The Vraxians responded at first, sending patrols to investigate, but as they repeatedly found nothing, their response time slowed. Eventually, they began ignoring certain types of signals altogether. This created blind spots in their surveillance network, areas where humans could operate with greater freedom, because the Vraxians had been conditioned to dismiss readings from those regions as false positives. 7 years after the invasion, a major breakthrough came. Dr. Ellis had discovered a way to use the Earth's natural magnetic field to disrupt the quantum entanglement the Vraxians relied on for communication. The technique required no electronic equipment, just precisely arranged natural magnetic materials placed at specific points around the planet. This information was shared through the global messenger network. Communities worldwide began positioning these simple devices, often disguised as natural rock formations. Each one created only a tiny disruption, barely noticeable. But together, thousands of these devices generated enough interference to degrade Vraxian communications significantly. The aliens responded by increasing the power of their signals, which only made them more vulnerable to the specific type of interference humans were generating. It was like shouting louder in a noisy room. It didn't improve understanding. It just added to the chaos. Captain Martinez's submarine forces began deploying specially designed mechanical disruption devices throughout the oceans, creating interference patterns that slowly degraded Vraxian communications further. Patricia Donovan's lunar engineers constructed gravity wave generators that created subtle distortions in the quantum entanglement network the Vraxians relied on for coordination. The aliens attributed these issues to natural phenomena, solar flares, Earth's magnetic field fluctuations, gravitational anomalies. They never suspected that a supposedly defeated species was systematically undermining their communications infrastructure using only mechanical devices and natural forces. In the Montana community, Jack observed the effects of these efforts. Vraxian patrols became less coordinated. Their harvesting ships sometimes drifted off course or repeated the same area multiple times. Occasionally, alien units would appear confused, hovering in place for hours before suddenly departing. It's working, Olivia said one evening as they watched a Vraxian scout ship pass overhead, ignoring the community hidden in the forest below. They're losing their grip. Not just losing it, Jack replied. They don't even know it's happening. News arrived from Ryan Phillips' underground network. They had begun positioning thousands of mechanical jammers at strategic points worldwide. These devices use no electronics, operating purely on mechanical principles to generate specific frequency patterns that could overwhelm Vraxian sensors when activated simultaneously. The plan was ambitious, a coordinated action involving human communities across the planet. On a predetermined date, all these devices would be activated at once, temporarily blinding Vraxian monitoring systems. During that window of opportunity, humans would take action against key Vraxian installations. As the day approached, Jack felt a mixture of hope and anxiety. For 8 years, humanity had been preparing, adapting, evolving. They had created a civilization that existed in the blind spots of Vraxian perception. But now they would reveal themselves, not as the primitive survivors the aliens believed them to be, but as something new and incomprehensible to the invaders. The night before the coordinated action, the Montana community gathered for a simple meal. No one spoke of what would happen the next day. Instead, they shared stories of the world before the invasion, ensuring that the youngest children understood what had been lost and what they were fighting to reclaim. After the others had gone to sleep, Jack sat with Olivia and Ben outside Jack's cabin. The night was clear, stars visible in the vast sky. Somewhere up there, Vraxian ships moved in their predictable patterns, their commanders confident in their control of the conquered planet. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Jack said quietly, "we've already won something important. We've proven that humanity can't be erased. We adapt. We evolve. We become what we need to be," Ben added. Olivia nodded, her face determined in the starlight. The Vraxians thought they destroyed human civilization. Instead, they forced us to create something better. As dawn approached, Jack prepared for his role in the coordinated action. He would activate several jamming devices positioned around their territory. All across the planet, thousands of others would do the same, creating a wave of disruption that would ripple through Vraxian systems. He looked around the community he had helped build, at the homes blended into the landscape, at the gardens designed to mimic natural growth, at the people who had learned to live in harmony with their environment not out of ideology, but necessity. The Vraxians had committed genocide against what humanity had been, but they were about to discover what humanity had become. The day of humanity's coordinated action dawned clear and bright. Jack woke before sunrise and stepped outside his cabin. The air was cool, birds beginning their morning songs. Nothing in nature revealed that today would be different from any other. But across the planet, millions of humans were preparing to activate the network of mechanical jammers they had positioned over the past year. These simple devices, using no electronics that would trigger Vraxian sensors, would create a wave of disruption unlike anything the aliens had experienced. Jack checked a simple timekeeper, a water clock he had built himself. Timing was critical. The jammers needed to activate simultaneously worldwide to achieve maximum effect. Olivia joined him outside, her face serious. "All our teams are in position," she said quietly. Ben left before dawn to activate the devices in the northern sector. Jack nodded. 8 years of preparation. Hard to believe it's finally happening. They walked together through the forest to their assigned stations. Jack would activate 5 jammers positioned along the ridge overlooking the valley. Each device was disguised as a natural rock formation, but contained a complex system of mechanical parts that, when triggered, would generate specific frequency patterns. Jack reached his first jammer as the sun cleared the mountains. He checked his timekeeper again. 1 hour until activation. He settled in to wait, hidden among the trees. His mind drifted to the journey that had brought them here. The day the Vraxians arrived. The 3 years of false peace as the aliens studied humanity's weaknesses. The devastating attack that killed billions. And then the long, patient response. Not a direct confrontation, but a transformation. Humanity had not tried to rebuild what was destroyed. Instead, they had created something new, something that existed in the blind spots of Vraxian perception. The time approached. Jack prepared the activation mechanism, a simple lever that would start a cascade of mechanical movements within the device. Similar preparations were happening worldwide, coordinated through the global messenger network that had taken years to establish. At precisely the agreed time, Jack pulled a lever. The device began to hum softly as its internal mechanism spun into motion. He moved quickly to the next jammer, then the next, activating each in turn. As the final device activated, Jack climbed to a vantage point where he could observe a valley. In the distance, a Vraxian harvesting ship hovered over the forest. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then the ship began to drift erratically, as if its navigational systems were malfunctioning. Jack smiled grimly. It was working. Across the planet, Vraxian systems were experiencing similar disruptions. Their communications network, based on quantum entanglement, was experiencing interference patterns that appeared to be natural phenomena. Solar flares, magnetic field fluctuations, gravitational anomalies. Their sensors, calibrated to detect human technology, were overwhelmed by thousands of jammers generating conflicting signals. The Vraxians had no defense against this type of attack, because they had never imagined it. Their understanding of warfare was based on technological confrontation. Weapons against weapons, ships against ships. They weren't prepared for an enemy that used the natural world itself as a weapon. Reports began to arrive through the messenger network. In former urban centers worldwide, Vraxian units were experiencing significant disorientation. Some had shut down completely. Others were moving in random patterns, unable to receive guidance from their command structure. The underwater colonies led by Captain Martinez launched the next phase of the plan. Teams of specially trained humans approached Vraxian installations from below, accessing areas the aliens believed secure. They placed additional jammers directly adjacent to key Vraxian equipment, amplifying the disruption effect. From the lunar base, Patricia Donovan's engineers activated gravity wave generators that created subtle distortions in the quantum entanglement network the Vraxians relied on for coordination. The aliens attributed these to natural lunar phenomena, never suspecting they were deliberately generated. By midday, the effects were visible even to ordinary observers. Vraxian ships moved erratically or hovered in place. Some landed and remained inactive. Others departed suddenly, as if responding to orders, only to return minutes later, seemingly confused. Jack returned to the community to find people gathered around the central meeting area, listening to reports brought by runners from other settlements. The news was consistent. Across the planet, Vraxian forces were experiencing significant command and control problems. "This is just the beginning," Olivia told the gathered community. "The disruption will intensify over the next few days as more jammers are activated and the effects cascade through their systems." The community's mood was cautiously optimistic. For the first time in 8 years, they could see tangible evidence that their strategy was working. The Vraxians, who had seemed invincible with their advanced technology and orbital weapons, were being undermined by simple mechanical devices and natural forces they couldn't detect or understand. 3 days later, Ben returned from a scouting mission with remarkable news. The Vraxian Harvesting Center that had once been Bozeman was in chaos. Ships were colliding with each other. Ground units wandered aimlessly. The aliens appeared unable to coordinate any meaningful operations. "Their entire system is failing," Ben reported. "They rely completely on their network for decision-making. Without it, individual Vraxians seem almost helpless." Similar reports came from around the world. The aliens' rigid hierarchical command structure prevented lower units from taking initiative when communications failed. The disruption had cascaded through their entire operation, creating expanding zones of. 10 days after the initial activation, the messenger network brought the most surprising news yet. Vraxian ships were being observed leaving Earth orbit. Not just a few, but hundreds, then thousands. The aliens appeared to be retreating. No one could quite believe it at first. After 8 years of occupation, after billions of human deaths, could the Vraxians really be leaving because of disrupted communications? It seemed too simple, too anticlimactic. But the pattern was clear. The aliens were abandoning their harvesting operations, their processing centers, their ground installations. They were gathering their forces in orbit, then departing the Earth-Moon system entirely. 2 weeks after the jammers were activated, Patricia Donovan sent a message from the lunar base confirming what ground observers had reported. The Vraxian fleet was leaving, not just a tactical withdrawal, but a full-scale evacuation. Using technology salvaged from abandoned Vraxian equipment, Ryan Phillips' underground network managed to intercept and decode a message from a Vraxian command ship. Translated into human language, it contained an assessment that sent waves of amazement through the messenger network. Planet deemed uninhabitable due to increasing natural interference patterns. Resource extraction no longer cost-effective. Indigenous species assessed as extinct except for scattered non-technological survivors. Recommend abandonment of Earth project and reallocation of resources to more stable systems. They didn't understand. The Vraxians, with all their advanced technology, never realized they had been systematically undermined by the very species they thought they had defeated. They attributed their failures to natural phenomena because they couldn't conceive of humans operating outside their definition of civilization. 1 month after the coordinated action began, the last Vraxian ship departed Earth orbit. For the first time in 8 years, humanity was alone on their planet again. The celebration in the Montana community was subdued at first, people almost afraid to believe it was real. But as confirmation arrived from observers worldwide, the reality began to sink in. They had won, not through superior firepower or technology, but through adaptation, patience, and profound reimagining of what human civilization could be. Jack stood with Olivia and Ben on their familiar ridge, watching the sunset over the valley. No Vraxian ships marred the sky. No alien harvesters moved through the forest below. What now? Ben asked, do we go back to how things were before? Rebuild the cities, the power grids, the internet? Jack considered the question. I don't think we can go back. Or that we should. We've learned too much. Olivia nodded. We've created something different. Something that proved more resilient than what came before. In the days that followed, representatives from communities worldwide began long journeys to a meeting place in what had once been Geneva, Switzerland. There, they would discuss humanity's future path. Not a simple restoration of the past, but a thoughtful integration of old knowledge and new adaptations. Some argued for rebuilding technological civilization. Others advocated maintaining the new approaches that had proven so effective against the Vraxians. Most favored a middle path, reclaiming beneficial technologies while preserving the resilience, sustainability, and adaptability they had developed during the occupation. 10 years after the initial Vraxian attack, Earth was a changed planet. The human population was a fraction of what it had been, but it was growing again. Communities flourished in places both expected and surprising. Underground networks, deep ocean colonies, mountain settlements, and even the expanding lunar base. What emerged wasn't a return to pre-invasion civilization, but something new, a society that used technology selectively and intentionally, that valued resilience over efficiency, that maintained its ability to operate outside conventional parameters when necessary. Jack never attended the Geneva conference. He chose to remain in Montana, helping to guide the community he had helped build. One evening, a decade after the Vraxians left, he sat with Olivia on their familiar ridge. Both were older now, with gray hair and lines etched into their faces by years of struggle and survival. Do you think they'll come back? Olivia asked. The Vraxians or others like them? Jack looked up at the stars, thinking of Patricia Donovan's lunar observers who kept watch on the sky. Maybe, but we'll be ready. We know something now that we didn't know before. What's that? That civilization isn't buildings or technology. It's the ability to adapt, to change, to become what we need to be. He smiled at her in the fading light. They committed genocide against what we were, but they couldn't imagine what we would become. Olivia took his hand, both of them watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. And neither could we.